Here is a question that has no comfortable answer. If 105 of your citizens were being held at gunpoint in a country whose government had personally welcomed the kidnappers, 8 hours by air from your nearest ally, and every government on earth told you there was nothing to be done, what would you do? Israel answered that question in 90 minutes on a runway in Africa. But before you understand the answer, you need to understand what the question actually cost. His name is Yonatan Netanyahu. Everyone who knows him calls him Yoni. He is 30 years old. He commands Sayeret Matkal, the Israeli military's most secretive special operations unit, the force that does the things other units are not designed to do. He is standing in a briefing room in Tel Aviv, looking at aerial photographs of an airport in Uganda. The photographs are low resolution. They were taken from the window of a commercial flight by a Mossad operative with a concealed camera. They show a runway, a taxiway, and a squat building on the southwest edge of the airport grounds. That building is 2,500 miles from where Yoni Netanyahu is standing. 105 people are inside it. He has 6 days of intelligence gathered under emergency conditions, a floor plan pulled from a decade-old construction archive, and testimony from a single passenger who got off the plane before it reached Uganda. He has never been inside that building. Nobody on his team has. He is being asked to take 100 soldiers into the heart of Africa and bring those people home. He says yes. Before we go further, here is something for you, because you clearly cannot get enough of stories like these. We put together a limited edition ebook, a collection of real operations where the plan broke before the mission did, and someone had 3 seconds to decide what came next. The intelligence gaps nobody could close in time. The calls made in the dark with half the picture. What actually separates an operation that survives its own mistakes from one that doesn't? These are the cases that never made it into any public record. If this is the world you cannot look away from, this book is where it lives. Scan the QR code on the screen to grab your copy, or click the link in the description. Then stay with us, because the story is just getting started. 6 days earlier, the problem didn't exist. On the morning of June 27th, Air France Flight 139 lifted off from Tel Aviv bound for Paris, 246 passengers, a crew of 12. A scheduled stopover in Athens, a completely ordinary Sunday morning flight. At the Athens layover, 4 new passengers boarded. 2 were West German nationals, Wilfried Bisset and Brigitte de Kuhlmann, members of the Revolutionary Cells, a militant organization with deep ties to Palestinian liberation groups. The other 2 were Palestinians from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine External Operations Wing. All 4 were armed. Pistols and grenades carried past security screening at Athens International Airport without detection. Nobody in Tel Aviv knew they were on the plane. Nobody knew anything was wrong until 12 minutes after the Athens departure, when the 4 passengers stood up. Bisset moved toward the cockpit. The 2 Palestinians took the rear of the cabin. Kuhlmann positioned herself in the center aisle. Weapons were visible. A flight attendant was pushed against the bulkhead. The pilot was told to follow new instructions or passengers would die. The pilot followed instructions. The aircraft was diverted first to Benghazi, Libya, to refuel. Then it turned south, deep into the African continent, and landed at Entebbe International Airport in Uganda at 3:15 in the afternoon. Uganda, a landlocked country in East Africa, 800 miles from the nearest coastline. Run by a man named Idi Amin. Amin was not a passive bystander. He drove to the airport personally to greet the hijackers. He shook their hands. He later gave a speech to the hostages in which he described himself as a mediator and a friend and a man doing his utmost for everyone involved. While he was speaking, his soldiers were taking up armed positions around the building where the hostages were being held. The building was the old terminal, a disused structure on the edge of the airfield, separate from the modern terminal that handled civilian flights. Large main hall. Several connecting rooms. No air conditioning. One equatorial sun bearing down through the walls. This is where 105 people would spend the next 6 days. But that number, 105, requires explaining, because it did not start that number. The flight left Tel Aviv with 246 passengers. After landing in Uganda, the hijackers began sorting them, first by passport. Israeli passports were collected. Then by name, passengers were called forward and screened. Then by appearance. Bisset and Kuhlman and the Palestinian operatives moved through the remaining passengers and separated those who appeared to be Jewish from those who did not. Non-Jewish passengers were released over the following days. French nationals. Other Europeans, people the terrorists had no use for. When the last group of non-Israeli nationals walked out of the terminal and onto a flight home, 105 people remained on the floor behind them. They were almost entirely Israeli, or Jewish. Several of the hostages in that terminal were survivors of the Holocaust. They had been through selection lines before. They knew what a deliberate, methodical sorting of human beings by ethnicity looked like. Some of them recognized it not as a historical reference, but as a personal memory. Bisset knew this. The German militant leading the hijacking inside the terminal was not a stupid man. He understood the resonance of what he was doing, and in the days that followed, in the way he moved through the building, in the way he spoke to hostages at moments when he had no tactical reason to speak to them, something in his behavior suggested that the resonance was not lost on him. He was going through with it anyway. That contradiction, a man who appeared to feel the weight of what he was doing and kept doing it, would matter later, in the terminal, in a way that nobody could fully predict. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was presented with the situation in its full dimensions. 105 people. Uganda, Idi Amin standing on the same side as the hijackers. A deadline. Demands for the release of 53 prisoners held in Israel and across Europe. Two facts sat on top of each other in a way that made everything harder. Israel maintained a firm policy of not negotiating with terrorists. The policy existed for a structural reason. Every successful negotiation tells the next group that the mechanism works. Paying once is an invitation to be asked again. But 105 people were going to be executed if nobody did anything by July 4th. Rabin authorized 2 simultaneous tracks: negotiate visibly, make the hijackers believe discussions were progressing, buy time, and in complete secrecy, plan a rescue. The planning track ran immediately into a problem that had no clean solution. Israel had no embassy in Uganda, no intelligence station, no assets on the ground. Idi Amin had expelled Israeli military advisors years earlier, and the intelligence relationship had ended with them. The country was effectively a black box. What did the old terminal look like from the inside? How many Ugandan soldiers were deployed and where? What weapons did they carry? What were their orders if shooting started? Nobody knew. Mossad began building an intelligence picture from whatever existed. A released hostage named Patricia Martel, who had gotten off the plane in Libya by faking a medical emergency severe enough that the hijackers let her go, was debriefed in London within hours of landing. She gave Mossad its first real picture of the hijackers. How many? What weapons? How they behaved under pressure. A Mossad operative booked a commercial flight that passed over Entebbe, photographed the airport from the cabin window with a concealed camera, and brought the images home. The photographs were imprecise, but they confirmed one critical measurement. The distance from the runway edge to the old terminal door was approximately 200 meters. 200 meters. That number meant a rescue force could cross the gap at a run in under 90 seconds. It also meant they would be fully exposed in the open for every one of those 90 seconds, visible to any Ugandan soldier watching the tarmac, vulnerable to anyone already alerted to what was happening. The 200 meters was the window that made the operation possible. It was also the window that could make it catastrophic. The entire approach plan rested on one thing keeping those 90 seconds invisible: a deception that would make the assault vehicles look like Idi Amin's personal convoy arriving for one of his daily visits to the hostages. The deception required a specific vehicle, a specific color, a specific configuration that Ugandan soldiers had watched arrive and depart every day for a week. The intelligence team identified the vehicle. They built a replica. What nobody in the planning process knew was that Idi Amin had changed his car. Several days before the operation, he replaced his black Mercedes with a white one. The soldiers at Entebbe knew the convoy was white. The replica sitting in the cargo hold of the lead C-130 was black. Yoni Netanyahu did not know this. He was building his assault plan around an assumption that was already wrong before the aircraft left the ground. And somewhere in the dark over East Africa, 4 planes were closing on a runway that nobody had asked permission to use. What happens when the soldiers at Entebbe see the wrong color car? And what Yoni Netanyahu decides to do in the 3 seconds that follow is the question that everything else in this story depends on. There is a version of this story where the operation never happens. It almost became that version. Inside the Israeli cabinet, in the 4 days between the hijacking and the authorization to fly, the argument against a rescue was not coming from cowards or politicians looking for the easy exit. It was coming from serious people who had done the arithmetic and did not like what the arithmetic produced. The core of their argument was simple. The intelligence picture was built on fragments. The plan depended on surprise. Surprise depended on a deception. The deception had a dozen variables that Israel could not control. If any one of them failed, if the Ugandan soldiers were on higher alert than expected, if the aircraft was detected on approach, if the convoy was challenged before it reached the terminal door, the result would not be a failed rescue. It would be a massacre inside a building full of hostages, broadcast to the world, carried out by the people who came to save them. That was not a small risk to weigh. That was an existential calculation. Yoni Netanyahu was not in those cabinet meetings. He was in a warehouse in Israel, running his team through the terminal entry for what felt like the 100th time on a full-scale replica built from photographs and a construction archive. Every door, every distance, every position. He had been given the building's floor plan and the aerial images and the debriefing notes from the one released passenger who had spent time near the hijackers. He had been given everything that existed. He knew, without being told explicitly, that everything that existed was not enough. There are things you cannot know from photographs, where exactly the hijackers stood at different times of day, what the Ugandan soldiers at the perimeter had been ordered to do if shooting started, how many additional terrorists had joined the original 4 after landing in Uganda, whether the terminal's internal layout matched the archived floor plan at every point, or whether years of use and modification had changed details that the archive didn't capture. He ran the drills anyway, because the alternative was not running them. The man overseeing the intelligence picture was not Yoni. His second-in-command, Moshe Betzer, Mookie, was one of the senior figures working through the tactical problems with him. They had operated together before. They trusted each other in the way that soldiers trust people they have been in danger with. They did not always agree. One of the things they disagreed about, quietly, in the days of preparation, was a specific tactical question about the approach. The convoy deception was the spine of the plan. The black Mercedes, the Land Rovers, the formation, designed to look like Idi Amin's personal convoy arriving for one of his daily visits. The plan called for the convoy to drive directly to the terminal entrance without stopping. No hesitation. No engagement with any soldier who challenged them unless absolutely unavoidable. Speed was the argument. The faster the convoy covered the 200 meters, the less time any Ugandan guard had to process what he was seeing and react. The counter-argument, Betzer's instinct, was about what happens if something does go wrong on the approach. If the convoy is challenged. If a soldier raises a weapon. A fast-moving convoy has limited options in that situation, and the suppressed weapons the team carried were not silent. In the stillness of an African airport at midnight, a shot is not quiet enough to guarantee the terminal stays unalerted. The disagreement was not resolved. It was set aside in favor of the plan as designed. That unresolved question would come back. On July 3rd, Rabin authorized the operation. But authorization did not mean unanimity. Several ministers who voted against it did not change their minds when they were outvoted. They believed the plan was too dependent on things going right that might not go right. They believed a failed rescue was a worse outcome than a negotiated release of prisoners, a belief that violated Israel's stated policy but was, in the arithmetic of lives versus precedents, defensible. Rabin authorized it knowing that if the operation failed, his government would likely not survive the aftermath. He authorized it anyway. The aircraft took off from Sharm el-Sheikh at the southern tip of the Sinai that evening. 4 C-130 transport planes and 2 Boeing 707s, one configured as an airborne command center, one as a flying hospital. The medical aircraft was not going to Uganda. It was diverting to Nairobi, Kenya, where, through a set of back-channel arrangements that nobody on the Kenyan side would acknowledge publicly for years, it had been permitted to land and wait. The Kenyan cooperation was a political act of significant risk. Kenya shared a border with Uganda. Idi Amin was not a neighbor Kenya could afford to antagonize openly. The arrangement existed because certain things can be done quietly that cannot be done loudly. If the operation went wrong and the Kenyan role became public, it would create a diplomatic crisis that Kenya had done nothing to earn. The doctors on the medical aircraft did not know how many patients to prepare for. They prepared for many. Inside the lead C-130, Yoni Netanyahu sat with his assault element in the cargo hold, in the dark, for hours over the African continent. There is a specific kind of time that exists before an operation like this, not waiting exactly, because the mind is still working, running through what is known and what is not known, rehearsing responses to contingencies that may or may not exist, but not moving either, just present in the dark with the weight of what is about to happen. He had written letters to his family before departing. He did this before operations. The letters described his thinking, his reading, the things he believed. They were not dramatic. They were the letters of a man who had thought carefully about what his life was for and had arrived at an answer that required him to be in this cargo hold at this moment. He was 30 years old. The lead C-130 began its descent toward Entebbe. The approach was timed to follow a commercial aircraft, the C-130s using the legitimate flight's radar return to mask their own. The airport control tower cleared the approach without unusual inquiry. The runway came up in the darkness below. The wheels touched down. The rear cargo ramp dropped open before the aircraft had stopped rolling. The black Mercedes rolled down onto the tarmac. 3 Land Rovers followed. Engines running. Convoy formation within seconds. Yoni Netanyahu was in the lead vehicle. The convoy began to move. 200 meters to the terminal door. At 150 meters, 2 Ugandan soldiers stepped out of the dark. They looked at the Mercedes. It was black. They knew the president's car was white. One of the soldiers raised his weapon. Here is where the story breaks from the plan. Every assumption about the approach, the deception, the convoy, the waved-through guards, ends at this moment. The element of surprise, the single variable that the entire ground operation was built around, is now gone, not compromised. Gone 150 meters from the terminal door, in front of a building containing 105 hostages and an unknown number of armed men, the plan has just failed its most critical test, and Yoni Netanyahu has 3 seconds to decide what to do. What happened next is the most contested 3 seconds in the entire operational record. In Moshe Betzer's account, the one he gave to the IDIF's official historians, and later to his memoir, the soldier raised his weapon but had not yet committed to firing. The soldier was processing information, not acting on it. The moment had not yet closed. There may have been a way forward that did not involve a gunshot. Yoni Netanyahu did not reach the same conclusion. He looked at the raised weapon. He assessed the posture. He made a judgment. He ordered the soldiers silenced. 2 suppressed shots. Both soldiers went down. But suppressed is not the same as silent. One of the soldiers cried out before he fell. That sound, brief, human, carrying in the stillness of a midnight airfield, traveled across the tarmac. Whether that sound reached the terminal before the Commandos did is something nobody who was there fully agrees on. What nobody disputes is what Netanyahu did next. He did not stop. He did not reassess. He did not call back to the command aircraft to report that the deception was blown and request guidance. He ordered the convoy forward at full speed. This is the reframe. Everything built in Phase 1 rests on one assumption, that the plan holds long enough to reach the door. The convoy works, the guards stand aside, the commandos are inside before anyone responds. That assumption is now ash. Yoni Netanyahu is in a moving vehicle, covering the last 50 meters to a building full of hostages, with the element of surprise gone, with at least one gunshot potentially heard inside, with Ugandan soldiers around the perimeter now alert to something happening on the tarmac. The abort window, if one ever existed, has closed. And here is what nobody in the planning process fully gamed out. The decision that Betzer believes was premature. The decision that cost the operation its best chance of a clean entry was made by the one man whose judgment the entire force was built to trust. If Netanyahu was wrong in those 3 seconds, if the soldier would not have fired, if the deception could have held another 50 meters, if the cry could have been avoided, then the commandos are about to enter a terminal that is no longer unaware of them. And if Netanyahu was right, if the soldier was a half-second from pulling the trigger, if hesitation would have produced a firefight in the open rather than inside, then there was never a clean version of this. Either way, the vehicles are at the door. Either way, Yoni Netanyahu is the first one out. What is waiting on the other side of that entrance? How many hijackers, where they are standing, and whether the gunshot on the tarmac has already reached them, nobody outside the building knows. The vehicles reach the terminal entrance and stop. The commandos are out before the engines cut. Moving at a run toward the outer doors, weapons raised, every man going to the position he has run through on the replica in Israel 100 times. The rehearsal is now the only map they have. The plan that built it is gone. The outer vestibule is clear. 2 Ugandan guards at the entry are neutralized before they can respond. The commandos push through. The main hall of the old terminal is 20 meters ahead. For a moment, maybe 5 seconds, maybe less, there is nothing coming back at them. No shooting. No shouting from inside. No reaction from the main hall. The false start. This is the moment the plan assumed would last until the terminal door. The quiet that was supposed to carry the convoy 200 meters across open tarmac has survived, but only barely, only in fragments, and only inside the outer vestibule of a building that still does not know what is about to happen to it. One of the commandos reads it as a sign. The gunshot on the tarmac may not have carried. The terminal may still be unaware. If they move fast enough and clean enough, the entry could still unfold the way the rehearsal built it. The hijackers caught off guard. Weapons not yet raised. The hostages already on the floor before anyone inside has processed what is happening. He is wrong. The main hall, doors open, and the first thing the entry team sees is a hijacker already moving. Not frozen, not confused. Moving, weapon coming up, body turning toward the sound that just came through the outer doors. The gunshot on the tarmac did carry. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough. Enough that someone inside registered it as something that was not supposed to happen. The entry team has no time to adjust the sequence. The sequence is already running. The megaphone carried precisely for this moment goes to use. The words go out in Hebrew and then English, stay down, we are Israeli soldiers. The hall erupts. 105 people have been on this floor for 6 days. Most of them have learned, in the quiet, disciplined way that people under sustained threat learn things, to follow instructions immediately. When a voice with authority says get down, the body moves. Most of them drop, most of them press flat and cover their heads. But most is not all. And all is what the plan required. The hall is large. The lighting is poor. The commandos are moving through a room dense with bodies in every direction, with active threats that have not yet been fully located, and with a floor full of hostages, some of whom are not lying down. A 19-year-old named Jean-Jacques Maimoni stands up. He is a French-born Israeli who emigrated the year before. He has survived 6 days in this building, and he is on his feet at the worst possible moment, moving in the direction of the entry team, in the dark, in a room where any movement that isn't flat on the floor reads as a threat. The commando who sees him has a fraction of a second. He fires. Jean-Jacques Maimoni dies in the rescue. This is not in any plan. There is no operational category for it. The rehearsal on the replica did not include this, because the replica did not include people who would stand up. The entry team keeps moving. It has to keep moving. Stopping is not an option in a room with active threats. Wilfried Bies is in the main hall. He is the man who has spent 6 days in this building telling the hostages he will kill them if his demands are not met. He has a weapon, and now he is looking at armed men coming through the doors and hostages scrambling on the floor, and a situation that is broken from his script so fast that the gap between what was supposed to happen and what is happening has no bridge. He raises his weapon toward a cluster of hostages in the corner. Here is what the operational planners could not have known. Bies is not, in this moment, the committed militant who boarded the plane in Athens with a specific function and the resolve to see it through. He is the man that Patricia Martel described when she sat across from Mossad officers in London and said, "This one is different, this one is not comfortable, this one apologizes." In the accounts of hostages who watched him from the floor in those final seconds, the picture that emerges is not consistent and not clean. Some say his weapon was moving toward the hostages, and they were certain he was about to fire. Some say it was wavering. Some say he was turning away. Some say he looked like a man who had run out of road and was trying to find, in the last seconds available to him, something that the situation wasn't going to give him. The commandos cannot see what the hostages see from the floor. They cannot read the hesitation, if it is hesitation. They are looking at a man with a weapon pointed at a group of people, and they have no more time than the soldier on the tarmac had, the same fraction of a second, the same incomplete information, the same decision that cannot be delayed. Bies is engaged and killed. And something in that death, the German militant who seemed to know what his presence in that terminal echoed, who spent 6 days apologizing for inconveniences while holding people at gunpoint, who raised a weapon and either was about to use it or was not, resolves nothing and explains nothing. It just ends. The false release moment arrives between the killing of Bies and the clearing of the connecting rooms. For about 30 seconds, the main hall is still. The commandos have cleared the primary threats in front of them. The hostages who are flat on the floor are staying flat. The entry sequence has run. The noise is gone. 30 seconds of a room that feels, briefly, like it might be over. It is not over. 2 hijackers remain in the connecting rooms off the main hall, rooms that the floor plan from the construction archive showed as storage and secondary spaces, rooms that the aerial photographs did not show the interior of, rooms that the assault team mapped on the replica as best they could from the available intelligence. The available intelligence was not complete. One of the connecting spaces has a second point of access, a door that the archived floor plan either didn't reflect, or that the commandos, in the noise and movement of the last 90 seconds, have not yet fully accounted for. A hijacker moving through that space is not where the entry team expects him to be. He appears from a direction that creates a brief and dangerous confusion about which way to engage without risk to the hostages on the floor. The near abort. For several seconds, the clearing of the connecting rooms stalls. Not because the commandos are frozen, they are not, but because the geometry of the space and the position of the threat and the bodies of the hostages on the floor between them create a window in which the next action is not obvious, and the wrong action would be catastrophic. The team resolves it. The hijacker is engaged. The room is cleared. But those seconds, the gap between the plan's map and the actual space, between the rehearsed sequence and the live problem, are the seconds that the pre-mission critics were pointing at when they said the intelligence was not complete enough. They were right. The intelligence was not complete enough. The operation is still working anyway, from the moment the convoy stopped to the moment the last hijacker in the terminal is neutralized, somewhere between 3 and 7 minutes, depending on which account you read. The hostages are alive. The terminal is clear. Now comes the part nobody inside was managing. Yoni Netanyahu is outside. He has been outside since the vehicles stopped, directing the evacuation, covering the 200 meters of open tarmac between the terminal door and the waiting aircraft, the most exposed position in the entire operation. The Ugandan soldiers at the perimeter are no longer still. They heard the shooting. They are responding. The exchange on the outer perimeter is active. Other IDF units are suppressing those positions. But suppression is not elimination, and the night is large, and the soldiers in the towers still have line of sight to the tarmac where the hostages are about to walk. Yoni is on that tarmac. What happens to him in the next few minutes is not inside the terminal where the operation was won. It is outside, in the dark, in the space between success and home, and the cost that was seated in a briefing room in Tel Aviv, in a man who read the odds clearly and said yes anyway, that cost is almost here. The shot that hits Yoni Netanyahu comes from the control tower. He is on the tarmac, directing the flow of hostages toward the aircraft, the most exposed role in the evacuation, the role that has to be managed by someone, and that someone is him. The Ugandan soldiers suppressed on the perimeter have not all gone down. The towers still have line of sight. The exchange is still active. He is hit. He does not fall immediately. The men around him will later say he kept functioning, kept giving direction, kept the evacuation moving, for a period of time that nobody can agree on precisely. What they agree on is that he did not stop. The hostages kept coming out of the terminal and crossing the tarmac and loading onto the aircraft, and the man directing that flow continued directing it after he had been shot. He was carried to the aircraft. He died before the planes reached Nairobi. He was 30 years old. The operation is 3 minutes old from wheels down when the last hostage boards the final C-130. The 4 aircraft lift off the Entebbe runway and turn north over Lake Victoria. No Ugandan aircraft pursues them. A second IDF unit had moved to the Ugandan Air Force section of the airport during the terminal assault and destroyed 7 MiG jets on the ground with timed explosive charges. The Ugandan Air Force, such as it was, no longer exists as a practical threat. The aircraft climb into the dark over Africa carrying 102 people who were on the floor of a crumbling terminal 6 days ago. 3 of the hostages they carried out are dead. 2 killed in the crossfire of the terminal entry. 1, Jean-Jacques Momoni, 19 years old, shot by the soldiers who came to rescue him. The medical aircraft waiting in Nairobi receives the first transmissions. The doctors prepare. Among the patients they will treat is a man who will not need them. In Tel Aviv, the news arrives before dawn. 102 hostages freed. 1 commando killed. 5 wounded. All 7 hijackers dead. The number 1 commando killed is Yoni Netanyahu. The country receives this information and holds both things at the same time, the relief and the loss, and finds no clean way to reconcile them. The celebrations that break out in Israeli cities that morning carry the specific texture of something that costs more than the outcome suggested it would. The cabinet ministers who voted against the operation do not say they were wrong. They say instead that they are relieved, and that they grieve for Yoni Netanyahu, and that both things are true simultaneously. Rabin, who authorized the operation knowing his government likely would not survive its failure, says very little in public. He does not need to say much. The operation speaks for itself. What the operation does not speak for itself about is Dora Bloch. Dora Bloch is 75 years old. She choked on food several days before the rescue and was taken to Mulago Hospital in Kampala for treatment. She is still there when the C-130s land at Entebbe. The rescue force is at the airport. Mulago Hospital is 40 kilometers away in a capital city that, by the time the operation ends, knows exactly what Israel just did. The aircraft leave without her. The morning after the rescue, Ugandan agents enter Mulago Hospital and remove Dora Bloch from her room. She is executed. Her body is found in a field outside Kampala years later. No one is ever prosecuted. The man who ordered it or permitted it dies in exile in 2003, never brought before any court, never formally charged with the murder of a 75-year-old woman in a hospital bed. This is the consequence that does not appear in the celebration. It is in the record. It belongs there. The international fallout arrives within days. Uganda, backed by the Soviet Union and several African states, brings a motion to the United Nations Security Council to condemn Israel for violating Ugandan territorial sovereignty. The motion fails. But the debate it generates is not performative. A genuine number of member states raise the question of whether what Israel did was legal under existing international frameworks. And no one produces a definitive answer, because there isn't one. Israel's position is that when a host government actively collaborates in the detention of another state's nationals, the victimized state retains the right to act in their defense wherever they are held. Most Western governments privately accept this. Very few endorse it in public, because endorsing it means accepting that other governments can invoke the same logic. The debate never fully resolves. What it produces instead is a precedent, not a legal ruling, but a practical one. Every government that followed the Entebbe operation understood that the new question in international security was no longer whether Israel was capable of this kind of reach, but what other governments were now permitted to argue they were capable of too. Every subsequent counterterrorism operation that crossed a border without permission, every targeted raid in a third country, every government defending unilateral action as self-defense drew on the political space that Entebbe opened. Israel did not go to Uganda to set a precedent. It went to Uganda to bring its people home. Precedents do not require intent. They require action. Inside the Israeli military and intelligence community, the internal reckoning is more complicated than the public one. The deception failed. The element of surprise was gone at 150 meters. The floor plan was incomplete. The connecting rooms did not match the archived layout. The hostage who was shot standing up is not in any operational briefing as an acceptable outcome. He is an outcome that was not in any briefing at all. The operation is studied as a model. It is also studied as a warning about the gap between what intelligence assembles under time pressure and what actually exists inside the target. The argument between Moshe Betzer and the official account of what happened on that tarmac, whether Yoni Netanyahu's decision in those 3 seconds was the right one, does not resolve with time. It calcifies. Betzer goes on record. The IDIF writes its history. The two accounts sit beside each other in permanent tension, each one supported by the people who were there, neither one provable beyond the perspective of the person giving it. The man who could settle it is buried in Israel. He was named Yonatan Netanyahu. The operation was renamed for him. His younger brother would one day become the prime minister of the country Yoni believed he was serving when he got into that vehicle and ordered it forward. Whether the decision he made in those 3 seconds was right or wrong, whether the soldier was about to fire or was not, is a question that the operation's success does not answer. Success is not proof of correct judgment. It is proof that the operation survived its own judgment. That is what this case actually established, not that the plan was sound, not that the intelligence was sufficient, not that every decision made under pressure was the right one. What it established was that a rescue operation, built on incomplete intelligence, with its central deception blown before the first door opened, staffed by men making 3-second calls with incomplete information in the dark, could still bring 102 people home. That is the thing that made the world recalibrate. Not perfection, the absence of it, and the outcome anyway. Entebbe did not exist in isolation. It was the visible expression of a doctrine that the Israeli intelligence and military community had been building for decades. A doctrine of long reach, of operations in places where no permission had been given, of the willingness to absorb cost in pursuit of a specific outcome. The cases that built that doctrine, the ones that ran before Entebbe and shaped what was possible at Entebbe, are not in any public file. Some of them are in the ebook we put together, linked in the description below. It covers the operational record of the intelligence and rescue cases that built the doctrine this mission was built on, the methods, the decisions, the outcomes that never made the public record but are part of the same lineage. The document is in the description. It is worth reading alongside what you just watched. If there is a question this operation leaves open that you want to think through, what the intelligence gap actually cost, whether Yoni's call was right, what the Dora Bloke outcome says about the limits of what any rescue can actually guarantee, leave it below. The most interesting part of any operation is rarely the part that made the headline.